At last, my life was gathering together. Freshly graduated, 23, eager to meet the world. Behind me was the turmoil of undergraduate life. I was about to start my profession and ahead. But suddenly today, my phone buzzed with a message that caused my stomach to turn over. From my mother came it. The woman I hadn't heard from in months went straight for the jugular. I need $2,000 for your stepsister's dorm costs, not a friendly hello or congratulations on graduating. Yeah, you read it. Not small conversation or pleasantries, only a straight demand for money. Let me also just clarify, this was not the first time she pulled something like this. When I was 16, my mother remarried. Mark, her new man, has 2 children, 14-year-old Ben and 17-year-old Lana. They seemed to be the stars of their own show from the first day, and I was only a supporting actor. My mom turned her whole life around them, leaving me to figure out where I fit alone. At first, I tried to understand. I knew mixing families may be difficult, but this was more than simply difficult. It was as though I had vanished. I recall the moment everything crystallized for me. Senior year in high school was underway. As a graduation present, my grandparents, the only family members who had regularly been by my side, handed me $2,000. I thought I could at last let air in. Working after-school jobs had helped me save still another $2,000, so I had $4,000 to start my college adventure. Then everything fell apart. One day, I logged into my bank account and felt my heart drop. The equilibrium came out to 0. Blinking, I watched the screen, thinking it was some sort of mistake. When I faced my mother, her response rendered me mute. Her almost rebellious face informed me she had taken the money as punishment for what she considered my disrespectful attitude toward Mark and his children. I recall thinking the ground had vanished underfoot. That money was my ticket to a better future. It vanished just as such. I understood then that things would never change. I packed and moved in with my grandparents, the only people who had ever really looked after me. My relationship with my mother was essentially non-existent going forward. We were strangers most of the time, although occasionally there were phone calls and a few holiday cards. I created my life without her, concentrated on college, and fought my way through. Now here she was, pretending like none of that ever happened, phoning me out of the blue to ask for money. Not just any money, $2,000 for Lana's private dorm costs, since obviously sharing with a roommate was beneath her. I didn't reply straight away to my mother's SMS. Sitting there, I gazed at my phone and felt both incredulity and resentment. How could she have thought it okay to ask me for that level of money following everything? Did she overlook her leaving me stranded and stealing my savings? When I moved in with my grandparents at 18, it felt as though a weight had been taken off my chest. I set down the phone and tried to ignore the memories. Though not affluent, they were kind, encouraging, and truly worried about me. They never asked for anything in return. They made sure I had what I needed to head to college. Their support helped me to juggle studies and a part-time job, working through late evenings and demanding semesters to graduate. After a few hours of pacing my apartment and rehashing the past in my thoughts, I finally texted her back. Now, poised on the brink of my future, I wasn't going to be pulled back into my mother's turmoil. I could not help you. That was a basic message. I sent it and inhaled deeply. Though it was my mother, after all, part of me felt bad. Another part of me felt justified. Over and over, she had picked Mark and his children over me. Why should I take responsibility for supporting them right now? The response arrived ahead of my expectations. She seemed to have been waiting for my reply by her phone. "We are family. You cannot say no just now. This is for your sister." Sister. That word started my blood to boil. Lana did not happen to be my sister. Mark's daughter, she hardly spoke to me except to remind me that I belonged nowhere in their small universe. Years of trying to be a member of that family, trying to get her mother to see that I was still her child, have gone by. Still, every time I attempted, I encountered either apathy or annoyance. I set down my phone once more, attempting to quiet the storm growing inside me. I was the outsider, the one not part of their ideal new unit. I understood how this would happen. If I continued to participate, it would become a guilt trip, A litany of all the ways I had allegedly let the family down, spun tales aimed to present me as the selfish one. This time, though, I was not going to let her spin events. Then came another book. You owe this to us after everything we have done for you. Everything they have done for me? I had worked too hard to let myself be dragged into that ancient cycle of shame and responsibility. The boldness almost caused me to giggle. My grandparents were the only people who had ever truly helped me. They were the ones who supported me at graduation, who made sure I ate when my finances were limited, and who gave me calls just to follow up. Mom? A few minutes later, my phone buzzed once more. She had been too preoccupied tending to Mark and his children to see I was struggling. This time, the call was scheduled. I fixated on the screen, seeing the name of my mother flickering. I understood my next action to take. Let it ring, wait till the buzzing ceases, and block her number. The quiet that followed seemed both weighty and freeing. I had chosen myself over her expectations once more. The next day, I woke up uncomfortable. Though I knew it was the appropriate action, blocking her was extreme. She never had. She would not change. My mind kept returning to that day years ago when I discovered she had wiped out my money, her icy, aloof demeanor as she informed me it was my punishment. That was when I realized to her that family meant only something if it would help her. This time I wasn't following along. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was running my life. Realizing that perhaps family isn't who you're born to, but rather who's there for you when you need it, was mixed. My grandparents instructed me in that as well. And so be it if my mother wanted to call me selfish for not wavering in my stance. Desperate for her acceptance, I was not that scared youngster anymore. The guilt visits and hollow promises were over. The day felt lighter. Though I had no idea what would come next, I knew one thing: I was not returning. A few days went by without any further calls or messages. I began to consider that perhaps, just maybe, my mother had realized I was not going to waver. The tightness coiling inside of me gradually came free. After catching up with some friends and returning to work, I even slept through the night free from that tight sensation in my chest. Though, of course, peace doesn't stay forever when it comes to my mom. It felt good. No, it felt freeing. To not have her shadow hovering over me. My phone buzzed with a fresh message one afternoon as I was leaving my job. This year it came from my Aunt Jenna. Jenna had always been the one striving to act as a peacemaker now. She had never personally participated in the drama, but she knew more than enough about my turbulent relationship with my mother. Hey, I know things are tough between you and your mother, but she's very offended. She is inclined toward conversation. Could you let her have a chance? I sighed, leaning against my car, and fixedly looked at the message. Over my adolescent years, I had given my mother a chance repeatedly. Every time it ended the same, me feeling like the horrible guy for yearning for anything from her. I wrote Jenna, I'm not giving her money, and I don't want to be guilt-tripped. I could already feel the weight of the past pressing down on me. I have heard enough. Her reply came right away. I genuinely understand. Still, maybe just hear her out. I felt guilty, as I find it difficult to stay away from her when she calls often. Jenna hardly deserved to be caught in the midst. She was always nice to me, and I understood she was merely trying to maintain harmony. I'm sorry she's dragging you into this. However, I also knew that if I opened that door, even a crack, my mom would barge right through, dragging me back into that never-ending cycle. I have to be strong on this one. I put my phone aside, trying not to obsess too much. Thank you for understanding. But the next day surprised me, even as I believed I could let it go. Exhausted and eager to just relax back, I arrived home from work and saw someone standing close to the door to my building. My heart quickened. My mother stopped short, considering whether I should just turn around and pretend I hadn't noticed her. She looked as put together as ever, but with a tight frown that indicated this wasn't a social call. She saw me, though, and it was too late. She started walking over. Her heels echoed the beating in my chest by clicking fiercely against the ground. She was in front of me, arms crossed and eyes narrowed, before I could say a word. "We need to talk," she murmured, her voice harsh. I inhaled deeply. Her eyes sparkled, and for a brief instant I saw desperation there if this was about money. It goes beyond mere financial gain. It speaks to family, Daniel. Hearing her mention my name like we were close, like we had any sort of normal mother-son relationship, set a spark of wrath inside me. I'm not walking away from family, her lips clenched. You pushed me years ago when you picked them instead of me. Your family also includes these people. And I raised you better than this. Better than to turn your back on your sister when she needs you. Here it was once more. Sister is... The word seemed alien and improper. I said evenly, Lana isn't my sister. Her face clouded and she moved closer, invading my space. And I'm not responsible for her dorm fees or whatever else you think I owe. Daniel, you're acting selfishly. You have always shown selfish behavior. We gave so much for you. Now, when we need aid, you act as though you don't care. The seething rage inside me erupted. What yields? You mean when you checked out my bank account? Alternatively, when you stopped showing up for anything that has significance for me? Mom, you replaced me a long time ago. Face it. And now that things are not working out, you are here attempting to make me feel guilty. She opened her lips to argue, but I stopped her before it worked out. I have put great effort into reaching where I am now. I carried on without you, without Mark, without anyone else save Grandma and Grandpa. Her face sank just momentarily, and I thought maybe, just maybe, she would at last understand the truth. You cannot come here now and pretend that we are close or that I owe you anything. Her eyes grew stern then, though, and she stepped back. Fine, she answered with icy clarity, but don't come crawling back when you need aid. I met her uncompromising look. I never have. I passed her and inside my building, feeling a weird mix of triumph and loss. Family ought not to be this way. At least lately, though, I was at last selecting myself, and that for once seemed right. A few days following that confrontation, I kept playing it in my head. Part of me thought that by advocating for myself, my mother would have had her last push into awareness of the distance things had gone. I should have, nevertheless, known better. Things never ended nicely with her. One Saturday morning, my phone rang from an unidentified number. Though I half-mindedly wanted it to be sent to voicemail, curiosity won out. Hello? Daniel, it's Richard. The voice was clear, deep, and frigid, with that cutting edge I recalled from my teenage years. Mark, sometimes known as Richard, has not personally contacted me in years. He was always a shadow, never interested in me except to correct or chastise. Why are you phoning? Already feeling my shoulders stiffen, I implored him not to pay attention to politeness. I know what happened to your mother. That is disgusting disrespect for her. Now that you are a grown-up, it is time you behaved like one. I inhaled deeply, trying to keep cool. I am behaving like a grown-up. I'm establishing limits. He laughed, the sound sharp across the phone. Limits? When you desert your family and refuse to support your sister, is that what you mean? Daniel, you are acting selfishly. This is how you pay us for all we have done for you. That term, everything, stuck in my chest like a splinter. As I spoke, my jaw got tighter. Anything? You mean you would overlook me in order to make sure Lana and Ben got everything they could want? You mean my mom wiping out my savings to impart knowledge? Richard, do not rewrite history. The silence that followed was deep and broken only by his soft breathing on the other side. His voice was deeper when he spoke once again, as though he was attempting to scare me. You have to grow up. Family calls for giving up something. You owe us that much. I sensed the resentment I had been suppressing erupting. Not Richard. I owe none to Mom, you, or anybody else. You each selected their family. I was not among them. I was only the trouble you had to put up until I departed. You now are getting in touch since you believe I owe you money. His voice dipped low and scary. Not family. That is manipulation. This is not ending, Daniel. Whether you like it or not, we will always be family. My hand shook as I dropped the phone before he could say anything else. His nerve to call me and to behave as though I was the issue after all these years. I had been expecting something from my mother, but Richard approaching me like that was another degree. Sure enough, the following day I received a text from Lana, knowing him well enough to know he wouldn't let this go. Among all people, I never imagined she would become engaged. None of us had been close. Opening the message, the words caused my stomach to turn around. Hey, Daniel. Though I understand things are strange between you and Mom, I truly need this dorm room. I find great importance in this. You could only help once, though? Not much money, and I know you're doing great." I sat down with the phone heavy in my hand. Not very much money is involved. Her message had shockingly great entitlement. She seemed to really believe that I lived to serve her whims, just because I had been able to start a life for myself. Though I considered answering, attempting to convey how incorrect she was, I realized it wouldn't change anything. To them, it was straightforward. I should provide it since I had money. I blocked her number instead of responding. More than I would want to say, it hurt. Part of me had always yearned that one day we may have some sort of civil but remote connection. Her letter made it abundantly evident, though. I was to her a means to an end. The next week was calm, but I felt as though I was strolling around under a storm cloud, waiting for the next bolt of lightning. One evening, then, I discovered a note in my mailbox. Just my name handwritten across the front, no return address. Though my first thought was to discard it in the garbage, curiosity won out, and I opened it and looked over the scrawled lines. It came from my mother, but it lacked a plea or an apology. That was a warning. I laughed aloud, a sour sound in the empty room, as she threatened legal action, saying that as her kid, I had an obligation to assist in maintaining my sibling. I knew this was just another attempt to control me, to draw me back into the role I had refused to play. The ridiculousness of it all, from demanding to guilt-tripping to threatening to sue, was almost too much to grasp. She erred, though. That mute, not particularly terrified child had changed. After their games, I grabbed my phone and phoned my grandsons. Their calm, consistent accents comforted me as they promised to be of assistance. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I would be all right. They had been there through the worst of it, and I was not ready to let my mom pull me down once more. After that letter, my grandparents intervened with great force. I was not alone in this, and I was not going to let them break me. Men of few words but strong beliefs, my grandfather contacted a buddy of a lawyer right away. Not long after, I was in a wood-paneled office outlining the whole matter. Leaning back in his chair, the attorney listened carefully, his demeanor changing from neutral to perplexed as I told him about the letter and everything preceding it. "You have nothing to worry about," he remarked. Legal justification for this is absent. Family responsibilities, especially the kind your mother is referring to, do not hold up in court. I felt a surge of relief, but it was laced with bitterness. It said volumes about the fact that my own mother would go to such great measures, dragging me through the muck only to extract money for Lana. That day, I left the office feeling more solid and more determined. This turned out to be my last position. A few days later, the attorney formally responded to my mother, therefore negating her unfounded allegation. I was not going to let her control me again. Constantly in touch, my grandparents checked in on me to make sure I wasn't alone handling all this. Their endorsement made all the difference. I felt like I had backup, that I didn't have to fight this storm by myself. Then, almost as though sensing defeat, my mom changed strategy. My mailbox turned out a handwritten letter, and I knew her familiar script right away. This time it was gentler. It nearly begged. The letter was full of sentences like, "You have to realize how much we are suffering, and I never intended it to come to this." I sat on the edge of my bed, reading those lines over and over. She even said, "I'm still your mother, and I love you." Once, some long time ago, they might have meant anything to me. They might have caused me to doubt myself, pause, and perhaps even pardon her. But right now, they seemed empty. Without thinking twice, I crumpled the letter and threw it into the garbage. They were the words of someone who had only reached out when they needed something, never because they wanted to be in my life. I knew going forward what I needed to do. Time came to mark a clear demarcation. I phoned my attorney and had them create a last cease and desist letter, stating unequivocally that any more calls to me with demands or legal threats would have consequences. It was hard, but essential. Then there was silence, first in what felt like eternity. No more books, no more calls, no surprise trips. I had created a wall, not merely established a limit. Days became weeks, and that constriction in my chest began to fade slowly. I went to work, ran across pals, and discovered that I was smiling more readily. One evening, I sat down for dinner at my grandparents' house. Life was mine once more, free from the shadow of my mother's expectations. The old kitchen smelled like fresh bread and roast chicken, and the conversation was kind and known. My grandmother rubbed my shoulder and laid a dish in front of me. She said quietly, "You did the right thing, you know." Her always gentle eyes met mine with a knowing glance. "I know," I said, and for once I truly meant it. I had no need to defend myself or feel bad for advocating my own peace of mind. A few months later, a friend told me Lana was living in a regular dorm at college. Long ago, my mom and Richard had decided their course. Now I had finally decided mine. There was no pomp, no luxury, only the usual college experience that many people go through. It let me consider all the tension, all the commotion my mother had produced, simply to escape something so commonplace. It was evidence, if I needed it, that their universe of entitlement and demands sprang from nothing except air. And me? On my own terms, I was creating something genuine and solid. Though it still persisted, the past no longer dominated me. Knowing I had broken the cycle, knowing I was more than simply a name on a list of demands, I could look ahead, free. And at last, I was good with that.